The underground rebel stronghold was a far cry from the once bustling cities that dotted Earth's surface. The walls, pocked with scorched remnants of battles long past, stood as a testament to the Resistance's fight for survival. Commander Ilia Vega surveyed the room, her sharp gaze scanning the faces of the men and women who had rallied to her side. Their eyes were filled with the same exhaustion she felt, but also something far rarer, determination. "We don't have much time," Vega said, her voice cold and calculating. "The Ninzor patrols are getting more aggressive. We can't afford another raid on the supply lines." Around her, the scattered remnants of Earth's military, the scientists, and the few civilians who had not fled into hiding all nodded grimly. A quiet, shared understanding passed between them. They were the last hope of a dying world. Vega's thoughts flashed to the day Earth had fallen, the day the Nizar came, the day humanity's golden age was snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Earth had once been the crown jewel of the galaxy, a flourishing center of trade, science, and culture. But all that had changed when the Nizar arrived, their towering warships blotting out the sun as they descended with brutal precision. Earth's defenses, once unrivaled, were crippled in days, and humanity was forced to submit to their alien overlords. Vega clenched her fists, the weight of those memories pressing down on her. Earth's cities had burned, its people enslaved. But now, after years of oppressive silence, the flicker of rebellion had sparked to life once again. "We've located it," one of her officers, Lieutenant Kian Rowe, said as he approached her with a data pad. "The transmission we intercepted, it's not just an old relic. It's a weapon, and it's hidden beneath the ruins of the city near the old vaults." Vega studied the map, tracing the coordinates with her finger. The vaults were part of the ancient archives, lost to time and hidden beneath the Earth's crust. They had been forgotten by all but the most dedicated historians. But what had once been the location of humanity's greatest knowledge was now a tomb, guarded by the ruins of forgotten wars and the lingering presence of the Nizar's machines. If the Resistance wanted any chance at winning, this weapon was their only hope. "How do we get there?" Vega asked, her voice low but resolute. "We've got an old access tunnel network running beneath the city," Rowe replied, "but it's a one-way trip. Once we're in, the Nizar will know we're coming." "And we'll fight our way out," Vega said, cutting him off. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect plan. Our only option is to take the fight to them. We'll move out at dawn." The room fell silent. There was no turning back now. Every one of them knew what was at stake. There was no backup, no reinforcement. This was it, a single strike against the enemy's heart. If they failed, humanity's last hope would die with them. Vega took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Gather the team. We leave in 4 hours." As the officers dispersed, Vega lingered for a moment, staring at the map. The coordinates glowed ominously in the dim light. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the Nizar knew more about their plans than they were letting on. It was too quiet, too perfect. A chilling thought struck her. What if the Nizar weren't just tracking them? What if they were waiting for this moment? Shaking off the thought, Vega turned and walked toward the weapons storage. If there was one thing the Nizar hadn't taken from humanity, it was their spirit, and that would be enough to carry them through. It had to be. The ember of hope was burning, and nothing would extinguish it now. The journey to the ancient vaults took longer than anticipated. Earth's surface had become an alien landscape, ravaged by centuries of warfare. Cratered cities, once symbols of human ingenuity and progress, now lay abandoned or under the watchful eyes of Nizar patrols. The sky, a sickly hue of gray, seemed to echo the despair that clung to the planet like a disease. Vega and her team had moved in silence, taking back alleys and underground routes to avoid detection. The lower levels of the city were a maze of old tunnels, remnants of humanity's past architectural brilliance. As they approached the vault's entrance, the air seemed to hum with an ancient energy, almost as if the very ground beneath them recognized the presence of the team. The deeper they went, the more the remnants of their civilization seemed to stir, crumbling murals on walls, faded symbols of a time when Earth had been the galaxy's most powerful force. The vault itself was hidden beneath the ruins of an old military base, its location guarded by a series of ancient security measures. It was a place even the Nizar hadn't dared to venture. Their presence on Earth had always been focused on dominance, not understanding. The weapon Vega sought was something far beyond their comprehension, and far beyond humanity's own knowledge, as they would soon discover. The team worked swiftly to breach the outer security, dismantling decades-old defense systems that still flickered with power. Finally, after hours of tense silence and focused effort, the massive steel doors of the vault began to open, creaking on their hinges as if reluctantly revealing its contents. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dust and the faint smell of forgotten technology. Rows upon rows of containers stood in the dim light, each one holding remnants of a time long past. But it was the central chamber that held their attention, a large, circular room, dominated by a strange alien artifact at its center. The weapon was unlike anything Vega had ever seen. Its surface seemed to pulse with an eerie blue glow, covered in symbols that resembled both human and alien designs, entwined in an intricate dance of forgotten language. It was clear that the weapon was not of Nizar origin, nor was it anything humanity had created in their last days of power. This is it, Lieutenant Rowe said, his voice filled with awe and uncertainty. Viva stepped forward, her heart racing as she approached the weapon. She could feel the weight of it, a presence that seemed to press down on her chest, like an ancient power awakening from a deep slumber. The weapon wasn't just a tool, it was a living relic, imbued with something beyond simple technology. Vega's instincts told her it was more than just a weapon. It was a message, an inheritance from the ancestors who had once ruled the stars. But unlocking it wouldn't be easy. As she examined the artifact, a sudden hiss of static filled the air, followed by a voice, a mechanical, disembodied sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Human, the legacy is not yours alone. You awaken what was buried for a reason. To wield this power is to unmake your world. Vega froze, her hand hovering inches from the weapon. The voice wasn't human, it was something else. Who are you? She demanded, her voice steady despite the fear creeping up her spine. What are you? The voice remained silent for a moment, before responding in a tone that chilled her to the bone. I am the guardian of the forgotten. The power you seek comes with a price. Humanity is not the only one who was betrayed. The weight of the words hung in the air as Vega and her team exchanged uneasy glances. The weapon, this relic from humanity's past, was connected to something far greater than they had anticipated. It wasn't just a weapon to fight the Nizar, it was a key to a deeper mystery, one that could unravel everything they thought they knew about their history. Before Vega could respond, a distant rumble shook the ground, followed by a series of loud, mechanical thumps. The Nizar were closer than they had expected, and they were coming for the vault. Move, now, Vega shouted, breaking the tension and snapping her team into action. The Guardian's voice echoed once more, this time filled with urgency. The price is upon you. The choice is yours, Commander. Awaken the power, or perish beneath its weight. With no time left to process the warning, Vega and her team grabbed the weapon, securing it for transport as the vault doors slammed shut behind them. The Nizar were here, and there was no turning back now. They had awakened the past, and whatever consequences awaited them, they would have to face together. The Nizar forces were closing in fast. The rumble of their heavy boots echoed through the tunnels as they advanced, their oppressive, armored presence looming over the resistance. Vega didn't need to turn around to know they were here. The sound of their approach was enough to steel her resolve. The weapon, now in the hands of her team, pulsed with a strange energy, and its hum had intensified as they ran, almost as if it too were aware of the coming battle. "Keep moving," Vega barked. "Row, take point. Keep the path clear." Lieutenant Rowe nodded, his face set with grim determination. The rest of the team followed closely behind, their weapons ready, eyes darting nervously toward the shadows. The tunnels they were navigating weren't much of a defense. They were old, their walls crumbling, and every step seemed to echo in the oppressive silence. They needed to get out of there fast. As they neared the exit, Vega caught sight of a figure ahead. A Nizar patrol had cut off their escape route, their massive forms silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights. The resistance was trapped. "Back, back," Vega shouted, signaling the team to fall into formation as they began to retreat into the vault's interior. "We fight here." Rowe raised his weapon and fired, sending a barrage of plasma bolts toward the advancing enemy. The first few Nizar fell, their armored bodies crumpling under the onslaught. But they were relentless. More troops appeared in the distance, flanking them from every side. The team was running out of time and options. Viva's mind raced. They needed an advantage, something to turn the tide. She glanced down at the weapon, its pulse now almost frantic, as if reacting to the danger around them. What had the Guardian said? The power comes with a price. Before she could process the implications, a deep guttural voice rumbled through the air, causing the ground beneath them to tremble. "Commander Vega, I presume?" A massive figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the light. It was Tharok, Supreme Commander of the Nizar forces, a towering figure clad in black, reinforced armor that made him seem more like a monstrous machine than a living being. His eyes, glowing an ominous red, locked onto Vega. "I had hoped for a more civilized encounter, Commander," Tharok said, his voice mocking. "But it seems your resistance is more persistent than I anticipated." Vega stood tall, every muscle in her body tense, ready for the inevitable clash. "The only thing that will be civilized, Tharok, is your defeat." Tharok chuckled darkly, his voice reverberating off the walls. "You think your pathetic humans stand a chance? This planet is mine, and so is the future. You cannot escape the inevitable." Behind him, his elite warriors flanked him, their weapons raised, ready to unleash hell. Vega's mind raced, searching for any advantage, any edge they could use to survive. The weapon, there had to be something about it that could help. But as she looked at it, she realized the truth. They didn't know how to control it. Not yet. The Nizar charged, their speed and brutality overwhelming. Rowe fired another round, hitting one of the warriors square in the chest, but the armor absorbed the blast, and the soldier retaliated with a shot that sent Rowe crashing to the ground. The resistance team fired back, but the Nizar were too numerous and too powerful. Vega's heart pounded as she surveyed the chaos around her. They couldn't win this fight, not like this, but there was no choice. They had to hold their ground. "Fall back to the central chamber," Vega ordered. "Protect the weapon at all costs." The team retreated toward the heart of the vault, with Tharok and his warriors hot on their heels. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in as they fought, the weapon's pulse growing louder, more insistent. Vega didn't know if it was her imagination, but the air felt charged, as though the weapon itself was awakening. Tharok's laughter echoed in the chamber as he followed, the sound chilling. "You think you can escape me? I am the end of your world, Commander, and you will kneel before me." Vega's hand brushed against the weapon, its energy flowing through her like a current. The weapon responded in kind, a surge of power filling her veins. She felt something old, powerful, and terrifying. The Guardian's warning echoed in her mind, but there was no turning back now. With a sudden, brutal motion, Vega pulled the weapon from its casing and aimed it at Tharok. The air around her seemed to hum with energy as she activated it. In that moment, everything changed. A blinding light erupted from the weapon, slamming into Tharok with the force of a star. The Nizar leader was thrown backward, his body convulsing in the shockwave, his warriors scattering in fear. Vega felt the weapon's power surge through her, overwhelming her senses, and she realized, with a jolt of panic, that she was no longer in control. The weapon was awake, and it was hungry. The blinding light from the weapon surged through the chamber, filling every corner with its devastating energy. Vega felt herself being pulled into it, her mind teetering on the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. The power of the artifact coursed through her, overwhelming her senses, threatening to consume everything she knew of herself. The weapon's pulse was no longer just a hum, it was a roar, an ancient fury awakened after centuries of dormancy. Vega, Lieutenant Rowe's voice broke through the haze, sharp and panicked. You have to stop. But it was too late. The light dimmed, leaving only a scorched, smoldering emptiness where Tharok and his elite warriors had once stood. The floor cracked under the pressure of the blast, sending chunks of stone and metal flying into the air. The Inzar commander lay unmoving in the center of the room, his massive armor scorched beyond recognition. But Vega knew better than to assume he was dead. Tharok was as much machine as he was alien, and the Nizar were not easily destroyed. The chamber fell silent, save for the crackling of the energy still radiating from the weapon. Vega could hear the whispers in her mind, distant and fragmented, as if the weapon itself were speaking, no thinking, but the words made no sense. It was an alien intelligence, one that felt as though it had existed long before humanity had even reached the stars. Vega stumbled back, shaking her head to clear the fog that threatened to drown her. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to do that. Her hands trembled as she held the weapon, the weight of what she had just unleashed sinking in. She had felt its power, felt it unlock something deep within her, but she had never expected the consequences to be so immediate, so destructive. Had she just killed Tharok, or had she torn him apart? Commander, Rowe's voice was tight, full of concern as he approached her. We need to move. Now, the Nizar will come for us in full force. You're not thinking clearly. We can't risk losing the weapon. Vega nodded numbly, unable to tear her gaze from the devastation she had caused. Her mind spun with the implications of what had just happened. The weapon wasn't just a tool for war, it was a force of nature, something that had the potential to unravel everything. And it had chosen her. But why? What was it that had awakened in her and them? Get ready to move, Vega said, her voice unsteady. We're not safe here. We have to take the weapon back to base. We need to understand it before it understands us. But before they could make their move, a harsh mechanical voice broke through the silence. It was Tharok, his voice distorted but unmistakable. You think you've won. The Nizar leader's body was moving again, slowly, his form rebuilding itself like a grotesque machine. His eyes glowed with an unholy red light. The weapon is mine, human, and you have no idea what you've unleashed. The air around him crackled as his armor began to regenerate, the melted and burned pieces shifting and fusing back together. Tharok's voice was laced with a mix of fury and something more, an undercurrent of fear. You were never supposed to awaken it. You have no concept of its true power. You have merely unlocked the door, and now I will make sure you never escape its wrath. Vega's heart skipped a beat as she realized the full scope of their peril. This wasn't just about the resistance. This was a battle for the very fabric of the universe. The weapon wasn't just a tool to fight the Nizar. It was a key to something far greater, something the Nizar had been guarding for eons. But what if Tharok was right? What if they were all in over their heads? Commander, we need to fall back, Rowe urged again, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. We can't fight him with the weapon in this state. It's too unstable. We need to regroup and strategize. Vega nodded, her eyes locked on the advancing Tharok, who was now fully reformed. The battle had only just begun, and it was no longer just about survival. It was about controlling a force so ancient, so powerful, that it could obliterate everything humanity had fought for. Move out, Vega shouted, her voice firm, though her insides twisted with doubt. "We can't fight him here, but we can't let him take the weapon. Let's go, now." The team moved quickly, darting through the chamber as Theric advanced, his voice vibrating with a sense of triumph. "You will never control it. I will take everything you hold dear. I will make you witness the power of the Forgotten." Vega's grip tightened on the weapon. She didn't know how they would stop him, but she couldn't afford to fail. Not now, not when humanity's future, and her own, were riding on the edge of a blade. The storm had only just begun, and they were caught in the eye of it. Vega and her team sprinted down the corridor, the chaos behind them fading into the oppressive silence of the vault's ancient hallways. Theric's voice echoed in their minds, a relentless reminder of the power they had just unlocked, and the dangers that came with it. The weight of the weapon was both a blessing and a curse, its hum like a constant heartbeat, reminding them of the uncertainty of their future. "We need to find a safe location to regroup," Vega said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ro, you're with me. The rest of you, cover the rear." Her orders were met with quick compliance, but Vega's mind wasn't fully on the task at hand. She couldn't shake the image of Theric regenerating, the Nuzur commander's unrelenting nature creeping under her skin like a slow poison. They were being hunted, and now they carried the key to an unimaginable power, a power that was just as dangerous in the wrong hands. "Vega," Ro's voice broke through her thoughts. "We're not going to make it if we don't figure out how to control that thing. It's too unstable." Vega glanced down at the weapon in her hands. It had stopped pulsing so violently, but its energy still hummed beneath her fingers. She had felt its power when it lashed out at Theric, felt it surge through her as if it were a living entity, seeking something. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a force, but a force with no discernible master. "We need answers," Vega said, her voice steady but heavy with the burden of her realization. "We need to know what it is and why it's connected to this fight." They reached an old maintenance room deep within the vault's bowels. Its metal door rusted and cracked. Ro set up a perimeter while Vega carefully placed the weapon on the table. It seemed almost alive, its intricate markings shifting and changing as though it were waiting for something. "We don't have much time," Ro muttered, his eyes constantly flicking to the corridor behind them. "Theric will come for us, and when he does, we need a plan." Vega nodded absently, her mind still wrestling with the enormity of what they had uncovered. She reached out and touched the weapon again, her fingers tracing the alien symbols on its surface. The hum grew louder, resonating deep within her chest. It was as if the weapon were speaking directly to her, trying to make sense of its cryptic messages. "Guardian," she whispered, recalling the voice that had spoken to her in the vault. "What do you want from us?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, the same disembodied voice that had warned her before echoed through the room, its tone almost sorrowful. "You have awakened what should have remained hidden. The power you seek is not for you, Commander. It was never meant for humanity." Vega's breath caught in her throat. "What does that mean? What is this weapon?" The voice continued, its words deliberate and heavy. "The weapon is a part of an ancient race, long gone. It was created not to wage war, but to end it. It is a tool of balance, meant to restore equilibrium when one species becomes too powerful. But that balance has long been lost. Humanity was never meant to wield it." "Balance?" Ro repeated, his brow furrowed. "You're saying this weapon isn't just a weapon? It's a tool of destruction and creation?" "Correct," the Guardian's voice replied. "It can destroy entire worlds, yes, but it also has the potential to rebuild, but to do so requires a sacrifice, one that you are not yet ready to make." Vega's heart raced. What kind of sacrifice? The weapon's hum grew more intense, vibrating with energy. "The cost of wielding this power is your humanity. The more you use it, the more you will become something else. A vessel for the weapon's true purpose. You will become an instrument of destruction, just as those before you did. The price is your soul. Ro's face went pale as the words sank in. This isn't just about fighting the Nizar, is it? It's about something much bigger than us. Something that could change everything. Vega stared at the weapon, her mind racing. The Guardian's warning echoed in her thoughts. What was she willing to sacrifice? To wield this power and defeat Tharok, to drive the Nizar from Earth, would come at a cost greater than anything she had ever imagined. The weight of the decision was crushing. I don't know if I can do this, Vega murmured, more to herself than to Ro. But if I don't, we lose everything. The Nizar will win, humanity will be wiped out. Ro placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Whatever you decide, we're with you, but you need to be sure. Once we use this, there's no going back. Vega's eyes hardened. The Nizar were already advancing, and Earth's survival depended on her decision. The future of humanity lay in her hands, and the weapon's hum called to her, like the promise of a storm waiting to be unleashed. She took a deep breath. We're going to stop Tharok. We'll figure out how to control this weapon. But if it comes down to it, we'll make the sacrifice. We can't let Earth fall. The storm was coming, and Vega was ready to face it. The silence in the maintenance room was unbearable, the weight of Vega's decision hanging heavy in the air. She could feel the weapon vibrating softly on the table, its energy palpable, almost sentient. The Guardian's warning echoed in her mind. The price is your soul. It was a warning that threatened to shatter everything she had believed about herself and humanity's place in the universe. Vega, Ro said quietly, his voice breaking through the tension. Are you sure about this? The weapon's power, it's not just a tool for us to wield. If we use it, if we let it take hold of us, we could be worse than the Nizar. She turned to face him, her expression hardening. If we don't use it, Ro, humanity will be wiped out. Tharok's army is already too powerful. We're fighting a losing battle. Ro shook his head, his eyes filled with doubt. But at what cost, Commander? We're talking about becoming something else, something we can't even understand. This weapon, this thing, it's not just a weapon. It's an ancient force, and we have no idea what it will do to us once we start using it. Vega looked down at the weapon, its glow now soft but still intense, as if it were alive, waiting. It felt like a part of her now, an extension of her will. She could sense its potential, the vastness of its power, but also its danger. The weapon didn't just belong to the Nizar. It had been created by an ancient civilization, an entity with the power to reshape worlds. We have to control it, Vega said, her voice firm. We can't let it control us. We'll find a way to master its power. We have to. Ro didn't reply, but his gaze was filled with an understanding, a silent acceptance of the path they were about to walk. They had no choice but to move forward. The future of humanity rested on this gamble. A sudden, sharp crackling sound broke the stillness, an explosion in the distance. It was faint, but unmistakable. The Nizar were advancing. They were close, and they were coming for the weapon. We don't have much time, Vega said, standing up. Get the team ready. We move out in 5. Ro nodded, turning to leave, but Vega caught his arm before he could go. Ro, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. If something happens to me, promise me you'll make sure this weapon doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Promise me you'll protect it, whatever the cost. Ro's face softened, and he gave a small nod. I promise, Commander. With a final look at the weapon, Vega turned to lead her team out of the room. The corridors of the vault were a labyrinth, but the walls seemed to close in on them as they made their way toward the surface. The air felt heavier now, as if the weapon itself was exerting its will on their surroundings. Every step they took brought them closer to an inevitable confrontation. When they reached the surface, the sight that greeted them was a battlefield unlike anything they had ever imagined. The Nizar forces were already swarming the area, their massive war machines dotting the landscape, their troops advancing in tight formations. But standing among them, towering over them, was Therok. He hadn't been killed. The weapon's blast hadn't been enough to destroy him. Instead, he was changing, his form shifting and warping, his body regenerating at an unnatural speed. His armor was now fused with the power of the weapon, glowing with a terrifying intensity. Therok was no longer just a commander. He had become something else, something far more dangerous. "Commander Vega," Therok's voice boomed across the battlefield, distorted and filled with malice. "You've made a grave mistake. The weapon is mine, and now I will make you pay for your insolence." Vega's heart raced, but she stood tall, her resolve hardening. This was it, the moment they had prepared for, the final confrontation that would determine the fate of Earth. She turned to her team, seeing the fear and determination reflected in their eyes. "We have one shot at this," Vega said, her voice steady. "We need to disable Therok's connection to the weapon before it fully takes over. If we don't, he'll be unstoppable." Ro nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "I'll take the left flank. We'll need to keep him distracted long enough for you to get close." Vega nodded. "The weapon's power is in the heart of it. I'll go in alone." "No," Ro protested. "You're not doing this alone." Vega held up a hand, silencing him. "If this is going to work, we need precision. I'll draw him in. You all keep him busy. We can't risk being overwhelmed." The team nodded reluctantly, falling into their positions. Vega could feel the weight of the weapon in her hands, its power thrumming beneath her fingertips. It was time to face Therok, and to face the cost of their choices. The battle began with a deafening roar as the Ninzer forces charged forward. Vega's heart raced as she charged toward Therok, the weapon at the ready. The storm had arrived, and they were going to fight until the very end. The battlefield erupted in chaos, the earth trembling beneath the thunder of Ninzer war machines, and the piercing shrieks of their troops charging forward. Vega's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder that she was standing on the precipice of humanity's last hope. The weapon in her hands thrummed with energy, its power palpable, its hum almost seductive in its call to unleash destruction. "Stay focused, Vega." Ro's voice came through her comms, a sharp reminder to remain grounded in the midst of the madness. She didn't reply, her eyes locked on Therok, who stood like a titan amidst the chaos. His form had become something monstrous, something far beyond the Ninzer commander she had faced earlier. He was no longer just a conqueror. He was a living embodiment of the weapon's destructive potential. Therok's red eyes locked onto her as she advanced, his massive, jagged frame shifting unnaturally, his voice carrying across the battlefield like a rumble of thunder. "You think you can stop me, human? This weapon is mine now, and you are nothing but an insect beneath my boot." Vega's jaw clenched, the adrenaline surging through her veins as she sprinted toward him. She could feel the weapon's energy amplifying with each step, responding to her growing resolve. Therok was taunting her, trying to make her hesitate, but she refused to falter. She had come too far, and humanity's future depended on her defeating him now, before he could fully merge with the weapon. Her team engaged the Ninzer forces head-on, distracting the enemy long enough for Vega to make her move. Explosions rocked the ground around her, the air thick with smoke and the stench of battle. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was getting close to Therok. The distance between them closed rapidly, and as Vega drew nearer, she could see the horrific transformation he had undergone. His body was no longer fully organic, but a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal, pulsating with energy. The weapon was embedded deep within his chest, its power radiating like a beacon. "Therok!" Vega shouted, her voice carrying over the din of battle. "You can't control it. You've already lost." Therok's laugh was chilling, echoing through the battlefield like the sound of breaking glass. "You are the one who has lost, Vega. You will become part of this weapon, just as all who have sought it before you." With a roar, he raised a massive arm, the ground shaking beneath his feet. He unleashed a surge of energy from the weapon, a blast of raw power that sent shockwaves through the air. The beam tore through the battlefield, obliterating everything in its path. Soldiers, machines, and Earth itself were reduced to ash in an instant. Vega dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast, the heat of it searing her skin as it passed by. Move, move, move. Rose's voice came through again, frantic now. He's charging up for another one. You need to get in close, now. Vega pushed herself to her feet, her muscles burning, her mind focusing solely on the task ahead. She could feel the power of the weapon surging through her, calling her to unleash it in full. But the Guardian's warning echoed in her mind again. The cost is your soul. She couldn't afford to lose herself in this power. She couldn't allow the weapon to take over. The moment Theric unleashed another blast, Vega sprinted forward, her every movement calculated. She could see him, his massive form illuminated by the deadly energy he controlled. She was close now, so close. The weapon in her hands pulsed with anticipation, its energy nearly overwhelming. She could feel its call, its desire to destroy. Theric saw her coming, and his eyes narrowed with hatred. He raised the weapon once more, preparing to strike. But this time, Vega was ready. With a defiant scream, she slammed the weapon into the ground, sending a shockwave of energy rippling out in every direction. The pulse of the weapon collided with Thurok's blast, a battle of raw forces that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality. For a moment, everything froze, the sound of the battle, the cries of soldiers, even the ground beneath her feet, everything held its breath. Vega felt herself being pulled into the energy, her body shaking as the power of the weapon surged through her, wrapping around her like an iron vice. She could feel the ancient intelligence of the weapon, its endless hunger, trying to consume her. But she fought against it, her mind resolute. She was not going to become another victim of the weapon's will. Vega, Rose's voice cut through the haze. You have to finish this, now. With every ounce of strength, Vega pushed forward, directing the weapon's energy toward Theric. The ground beneath them cracked and splintered as the blast connected with his form. The sheer force of the explosion sent ripples through the air, the shockwave tearing apart everything in its path. For a moment, all was still. Then, slowly, the dust began to settle, revealing the aftermath. Theric's form lay crumpled on the ground, his body charred and smoking. The weapon had done its job. The monstrous creature he had become was no more. Vega collapsed to her knees, her body trembling from the strain of the battle. The weapon in her hands was still humming, its power still resonating in the air. She had won, but at what cost? She didn't have time to think about it. The war was far from over, and she had no idea what kind of price she had just paid. But for now, the Nuzur had been defeated. The storm had passed. The battlefield was eerily quiet as the dust of the final battle began to settle. The once thriving landscape was now a barren wasteland, scared by the cataclysmic struggle that had unfolded. The Nuzur forces lay in ruin, their machines twisted and melted by the unleashed power of the weapon. The ground beneath Vega's knees was scorched, the air thick with the smell of burning metal and the acrid scent of destruction. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling with the aftermath of the overwhelming surge of energy she had wielded. The weapon in her hands had fallen silent, its hum now a distant whisper, as if it too were exhausted by the intensity of what had transpired. She felt its power still pulsing through her veins, a constant reminder of the choice she had made and the cost she had paid. Vega lifted her head slowly, her eyes scanning the battlefield. Ro and the rest of the team were emerging from the smoke, their faces etched with exhaustion but filled with relief. They had survived. Against all odds, humanity had won. The Nuzur were defeated, their leader destroyed. Earth was safe, but the victory felt hollow. She looked down at the weapon, her fingers tracing the now cold surface. It no longer hummed with the same violent energy, but she could still feel it inside her, a presence that refused to be ignored. The Guardian's warnings still linger in her mind. The cost is your soul. Has she lost herself in the process? Had the weapon's power taken more than just her strength? Commander, Rose's voice broke through her thoughts, soft yet firm. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. We did it. We stopped them. Earth is safe. Vega didn't respond immediately. She was still lost in her own mind, the weight of everything they had endured pressing down on her. She had wielded the weapon, but now it was clear that it wasn't just a tool of destruction. It was a force of balance, a power that could tear apart the very fabric of what it meant to be human. I don't know if I can ever go back to who I was, Vega said quietly, her voice barely audible above the silence of the battlefield. I can feel it, Ro. The weapon, it's still inside me. Ro's expression softened, his grip tightening on her shoulder. We'll figure it out. We always do. You didn't just use the weapon, Vega. You controlled it. You kept humanity from falling into darkness. Whatever this power is, it can't take away what you've done. You saved us. Vega nodded, but the doubt still gnawed at her. Could she truly be the same after all of this? The weapon had changed her, just as the Guardian had warned. She could feel the weight of that change settling deep within her, like a shadow that would never leave. I don't know what the future holds, Vega said, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I do know one thing. We have to rebuild. Earth is ours again, but we've lost so much. We can't let what happened to us happen to anyone else. Ro nodded. We'll rebuild together. Humanity's resilience is stronger than any weapon, any enemy. We'll find a way to use what we've learned, and we'll make sure the mistakes of the past don't define us. Veda stood up, the weapon still in her grasp. She looked out across the battlefield, her gaze lingering on the remnants of the Nizar forces, the twisted wreckage of their war machines. They had been powerful, unstoppable even, but they were gone, and in their place, Earth's future was now uncertain, yet brimming with possibility. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The weapon had been a tool of destruction, yes, but it had also been a symbol of hope. It had given them the power to fight, to stand against the tyranny that had threatened their world. And now it was up to her and her team to ensure that this power would never be misused again. For the first time in what felt like forever, Vega allowed herself a moment of peace. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as she stood there, the weapon still pulsing faintly in her hands, she knew the real battle had only just begun. There would be no easy answers, no simple solutions. The cost of victory would follow her, shaping the world she had fought so hard to protect. And in the days to come, as humanity began to rebuild, Vega would walk the delicate line between what they had been and what they would become. The weapon's power might have been neutralized for now, but the lessons learned from its existence would shape the future of mankind forever. But for now, Earth was free, and that was enough.